I'm Kevin Crawford from Kevin Crawford Consulting, and welcome to the Executive Mirror. Hello, my name is Kevin Crawford, and I'm with Kevin Crawford Consulting, and I'm joined with a dear friend of mine.
Well, thanks, Kevin. I'm Dr. Relly Nadler. I'm CEO of True North Leadership and glad to be here with you.
Well, I look forward to the conversation today, and I think our topic is going to be primarily speaking about crisis to clarity. And there's a lot to say about crisis to clarity, and I'm sure you've got a lot to offer on that subject.
Yeah, and from my background, I've worked with leaders from over 200 different companies and kind of dealing with a lot of the issues that you deal with. So I'm excited to share some of these things that we've learned from our experience.
Mm-hmm. Don't you find that one of the most significant things to avoid the chaos that an individual or an organization would go through is the preparation prior to the event?
I would agree. And that doesn't hardly ever happen.
Yeah.
I've been in so many meetings where they want to be strategic and it gets pushed off because there's the crisis of the day. And so the preparation, the strategic side rarely happens.
Right. What I have found is there's kind of two prongs to this preparation. One is the more practical things that you can do to set yourself up for a crisis or a significant disruption. But then the other part of it seems to be just the mental orientation that a crisis is going to be coming your way. A significant disruption in your personal life, in the life of somebody in your organization or the organization itself is going to come. And it seems as though just that awareness that it is coming shortens down the response time a little bit. At least that's how I refer to it. But I'd love to get your thoughts.
I think things happen so fast. And Kevin, in our conversation, you heard me talk about that. We're all on autopilot. Now, autopilot is great to get things done and not have to use your brain as much, but it doesn't always prepare the right answer for those right situations. So a lot of the talk, or the strategic talk and the reflective talk, is ahead of time when they're not on autopilot. What would you like to do? What do you want to focus? What's the best thing for you and your team to do?
It seems as though autopilot works well when we're driving cars or brushing our teeth. But when we're faced with a significant event in the organization, that you want to bring as much objectivity to that discussion as possible. And I think that's what you're getting at.
Exactly. Although with your background as a fire chief, city manager, first responder, you need to be on an autopilot. And we've talked about this. So what's the preparation so you can make the right call? For most of the people that we deal with is not the same crisis situations where they need to have the right call at the right minute. They can actually think, reflect what should happen.
Mm-hmm. I often say that I'm doing the same thing I did 30-some years ago as a firefighter. You know, I'm still responding to crises and to significant problems. And I needed to have a solution. You know, I needed to bring order to chaos, clarity to chaos, if you will. Same thing in this business now, you know. It's the same kind of emergency response that I was doing back then. And the instruments that are most effective is this idea of preparation. Getting your head prepared for it when it comes and putting in the systems so that you operate differently than you would on a day-to-day. And that's where I think most people really fail, is that they just don't believe those bad times are going to come, and they don't have systems in place to switch over to. Because the normal mission statement and vision for the organization, that all goes out the window when you're facing a crisis.
So I think people show their leadership, and you've seen this, is in these moments. And also often these crises that call crucibles, sometimes that's the character of the person. What do they do in those moments? And that's where you want to have the preparation, you want them to be able to bring up the best things. So some of that is this whole reflection that we've talked about. So tell me, when you're with an executive leader and you talked about preparation and systems, how do you go about that with them? Like, what's the conversation sound like?
Well, the conversation sounds like preparation is the sun kind of rises and sets on crisis management with preparation. So we have to get them in a position to really think that it is coming. It's just a matter of time.
Right.
Degree of crisis, we'll find out what that's going to be. But you need to recognize that your mode of operation, the things that you do day in and day out, the mission of the organization, that really gets put on the back burner, and you have to create new priorities. And where most executives get balled up as they look at the crisis and they get blinded by the crisis. And I'm sure you've seen that.
Yeah.
They get stalled, and then they can't engage good thinking to manage it.
One of the things that I like to think about in research is just kind of what's happening to the brain. Now, you've been in these first responder situations, and like we said, not every leader is in a first responder. Something's got to happen right now, but it feels that way to them. It's a crisis, and what happens in the brain, we get tunnel vision, and we're not able to kind of piece off what needs to be done because the brain is using a lot of energy to kind of solve the problem. And I think what happens, often they pick the first thing that pops up is the best thing, which often is not. So that's where people are reactive. And I know 95% of us are all reactive for good reasons. But in those crisis situations, if someone's not dying in your arms or there's not a fire there, you really have time to think. And you have time to ask people these strategic questions. You have time to get more information from other people. And I think it takes the pressure off some of the CEOs and the leaders that they're not alone, even though that's how it feels.
And one of the expectations that gets placed on executives is that they need to act. They need to make a decision. And those that are impacted by the crisis or the disruption, they have an expectation that the boss is going to do something.
Yeah.
And he's going to do something. And what he's going to do is supposed to be the right thing to do. And so the boss feels a lot of pressure to respond. And so they kind of grasp.
Right.
This is my observation. I'd love to hear yours. They grasp at the first thing that really comes across the bow. Do you see that?
Yeah. I think one of the things I like to say, because I thought it, therefore it's a fact. When often it may be a bias, it may be the wrong answer. It came to me quick. It's got to be brilliant. And often it's not. I mean, it's an okay idea. This is where the power of the group. And so usually when I work with executive, if it's not a crisis and you don't need an immediate answer, your answer should come at the end. You can say, here's what's in front of us. Here's a challenge. I'd like to hear from everybody and just hold on, gather that intelligence and then respond to that intelligence.
That is so brilliant. What I used to say is the CEO's job, or whoever's leading that meeting of executives, their job is to orchestrate.
Right.
It's not to bring their perspective to the table, but it's to make sure that the brilliance that resides in each individual is brought to the table. And there's a lot of psychology in that room, isn't there?
And this is what I love when we talk about this, is that orchestra leader. I'd like to hear from this side. Can you guys hold on a second and bring it together? From the brain neuroscience, how do we align the brains? Our brains are all over the place. So anybody even listening to us now, they're thinking about what we're saying, but they're also thinking about something else. So part of the job of the leader is to align the brains. Even simple things. You were talking about, being involved with an organization the last few days. What is it that we're talking about now? What's the purpose of this conversation? Even that, often people are having different opinions. So that alignment of the brains, and that's where I think some of the synergy can happen.
Do you also find it important I always felt that it was important that I do my best to get all their psychological baggage as best I can left at the door. And that's a difficult thing to do because it's their psyche, it's their head to manage. But those little things that I can do to make them feel at ease and comfortable puts them in a place where they're not going to be leading with the mask that their psychology, their head, kind of is asking for. Does that make sense?
Oh, it definitely makes sense.
Do I have that right?
I think you have it right, but you got me thinking, so how do you do that? Because that's what's fun about this conversation. How do you get them to put that outside the door? And then I'll kind of tell you some of my thoughts.
Well, I used to say that every one of my direct reports got their own strategic plan. Oh. And that meant that I had to understand what made them tick.
Yeah.
You know, what they respond to, what they don't respond to, what they like. And then I needed to kind of talk that language with them. I needed to be in that space, you know. We were with somebody recently here, and they just drive on business, and their family was somewhat secondary. Right. But I had an individual sitting right next to this person that I'm talking to, and family was the most important thing, and business was secondary. Yeah. So the language changes, the discussions change, and the more I can get them to feel comfortable in the meeting and comfortable with our dialogue, at least I've quieted down some of the noise in the head that would keep them from bringing their brilliance to the table.
Well, and I think what's behind what you're saying, Kevin, you know them. You know their strengths. You know their weaknesses. You know their family. You know the connection points. And so this whole thing that's in the literature about psychological safety, they feel safe with you. They're not in that meeting, let me show Kevin what I think, or let me show my peers how much I know. And that's where you get the egos, you get the hidden agendas. A great leader, and it sounds like you've been able to do this and in your work, they are really a facilitator, you know, versus here's what I think, let's go do it. Sometimes that happens, but the different leadership styles, and can they really know their team, and going back to the orchestra, hey, I'd like to hear what you guys think about that because you've got a wealth of experience in that. You've done this a lot. So one, I want to hear it, but in the group, I'm even building them up in front of everybody else. And they go, oh, they have that experience? I want to hear that from Kevin when I speak.
Right. I remember thinking, as a CEO, that the most important thing that I can do is create a sense of safety for them. Obviously, I'm going to be responsible for their physical safety. Right. But if I can put them in a position of psychological safety. Yeah. So my job was to really, influence the environment as best I could, so they'd be in that psychological safe place. And I guess that's because generally we're all somewhat fearful, and we're concerned about self-preservation in everything that we do, physically and psychologically.
Yeah. Do I have to prove myself? Am I trying to prevent somebody knowing something about me? All these kind of aspects of the person are there, and a really good leader spends the time getting to know them. And I imagine, Kevin, that you do this. And what's the most important? One of the most important interventions you can do as a leader is a one-on-one meeting. And Gallup tells us this also, once a week, minimum 15 minutes. But that's where not only when you talk about the task, what did you get done, but hey, you were out last week, or I know your kids were sick, or I know someone on your team, you're looking for a replacement. How is that going? Mm-hmm. If you don't have those conversations, and what I find now, people are too busy to have that.
It's about connection, isn't it?
Definitely.
What happens with connection of two people?
Yeah. I think in simple terms, they feel seen, they feel honored, they feel respected. And so their guard is down. And you and I have talked about the value of vulnerability. I don't have to have my best face on, my mask on when I talk to Kevin. I can say, I'm having a challenge with this, and you're not going to judge me, but you're going to say, well, tell me more about it. Tell me about the challenge. How do I partner with you about your challenge?
Right. So it removes that mask that most of us
we all
have on quite a bit of the time, I'm guessing.
Yeah. And that's where I think a leader and their vulnerability, it's a buzzword now, this vulnerability, but you and I both believe in that. And what does that look like? The leader just has to be able to say, I'm not sure about this, or this is a challenge, or I need some of your help. Doesn't mean I'm saying, hey, look how weak I am. You don't always have to exaggerate your weakness, but it's that sense of, I need you guys. I need your help. Here's a problem I'm having a hard time solving. Those are all vulnerability statements. It's not like you have to open your, robe and show weaknesses. It's how do you do that in a strategic way?
Right. And I've believed that your leadership competencies can coexist with a sense of vulnerability. But vulnerability, while it takes great courage to show that kind of risk, is really the secret sauce of leadership. Because it creates that connection, I suppose.
Exactly. And I love when you talk about the secret sauce. And it's the vulnerability aspect. And because I don't think a lot of leaders experience that or understand it as well, as you're saying it. And it is that connection. So when I'm like now, we're experiencing it. And so what's happening now, you and I feel heard, and we're releasing oxytocin. This is kind of this neurotransmitter when you just feel good. It's trust. And so oxytocin, serotonin, like we all have it, but we can't put a name on it. It's going on in the body. I don't know. I kind of like Kevin. I kind of like talking to him.
Yeah.
But internally, these chemicals are getting activated. Why trust is so important for a leader to generate trust. And I think what's happened often, they're so task focused that they don't have the time even for any of the small talk, 5 minutes, tell me what's going on for you.
Right. Everything does move at the speed of trust, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly.
For more information, contact Kevin, CrawfordConsulting.com.